This is a scandal of a man, Jonathon Wild, who was revered by the London population during the early 18th century for fighting the crime epidemic that was sweeping the capital. But all was not quite what it seemed. Was this thief-taker perhaps a gamekeeper turned poacher, who was only interested in reward money, whichever way it could be made? He was revered as being a saviour for the citizens against burglary, robberies and thefts, feted by royalty and the authorities for his successes, for which he was paid handsomely for every arrest. But as it would turn out, there was a very different side to the story. His exact birth date is unknown, and it is thought to be around 1683 in Wolverhampton, as the first of 5 children in a poor family. His father was a carpenter, and his mother sold herbs and fruit in the local market. At that time, Wolverhampton was the second largest town in Staffordshire, with a population of around 6,000, many involved in ironworking and related trades. He had married and had a son, but came to London in 1704 as a servant. After being fired by his employer, he returned home, before coming back to the city in 1708. London was by far the largest in England, with a population of around 600,000, of whom 70,000 lived within the ancient walls of the City of London. Little is known about his first 2 years there, but he was arrested for debt in March 1710 and sent to one of the debtors' prisons, which was notoriously corrupt, with jailers demanding a bribe, or garnish, for any minor comfort. Wild became popular, running errands for the warders, and eventually earning enough to repay what he owed and the cost of being imprisoned, and even lend money to other prisoners. He received what was termed the liberty of the gate, meaning he was allowed out at night to aid in the arrest of criminals. During one of these forays, he met Mary Milliner, a prostitute who began to teach Wild criminal ways, and brought him into her own group, whether of thieves or whores, or both. He was introduced to a wide range of London's criminal underclass, and with his new skills and contacts, when he was released in 1712, began to live with Milliner as her husband in Covent Garden, despite both of them having other marriages. Soon he was thoroughly acquainted with the underworld, with both its methods and its inhabitants. At some point during this time, Milliner had begun to act as a madam to other prostitutes, and Wild as a fence, and receiver of stolen goods. He began, slowly at first, to dispose of these ill-gotten gains, and to pay bribes to get thieves out of prison. He became a major figure in the murky shadows of the city, notable for operating on both sides of the law, posing as a public-spirited vigilante and self-titled thief-taker general. He simultaneously ran a significant criminal empire and used his crime-fighting role to remove rivals and laundered the proceeds of his own crimes. Wild exploited a strong public demand for action during a major 18th century crime wave in the absence of any effective police force. As a powerful gang leader himself, he became a master manipulator of the legal system, collecting the rewards offered for valuables, which he had stolen himself, bribing prison guards to release his colleagues, and blackmailing any who crossed him. He was often consulted on crime by the government due to his apparently remarkable prowess in locating stolen items and those who had stolen them. He was responsible for the arrest and execution of notorious Jack Sheppard, a petty thief and burglar who had won the public's affection as a lovable rogue, having broken out of jail 4 times, which we covered in a previous episode of Vintage Scandals. Crime had risen dramatically from 1680, and property crime, in particular, rose sharply as the city grew in importance as a commercial hub. In 1711, Charles Hitchin, Wild's forerunner and future rival as thief-taker, said that he personally knew 2,000 people in London who made their living solely by theft. Hitchin had obtained public office as a city's under-marshal, effectively its top policeman, having paid £700 for the privilege. He abused his office by using extortion on an extravagant scale, both from thieves and from their potential victims. He would accept bribes to let criminals out of jail, selectively arrest thieves, and coerce sexual services from whorehouses. Hitchin's testimony about the rise of crime was given during an investigation of these activities by the London Board of Aldermen, who suspended him from the position in 1713. Wild was approached by Hitchin to become one of his assistants in thief-taking, a profitable activity, on account of the £40 reward paid by the government for catching a rogue. The advent of daily newspapers had led to a rising interest in crime and criminals, and as they reported notable offences, the public worried more and more about property crime and grew increasingly interested in the issues of criminals and policing. London depended entirely upon local parish wardens and had no citywide police force. The public was eager to embrace both well-known criminals like Jack Sheppard and the entirely upper-class gang called the Mohocks, which we covered in a prior episode of Vintage Scoundrels. Newspapers also focused on the valiant crime fighters. The city's population had more than doubled, and there was no effective means of controlling crime. With the increase in stealing, as there was in 1714, it was not helped by demobilized soldiers who were on the streets. Hitchin was eventually restored to his position, but Wild went his own way, opening a small office in the Blue Boar pub, but continued to call himself Hitchin's deputy, entirely without any official standing, and took to carrying a sword as a mark of his supposed authority, also alluding to pretensions of gentility. His scandalous method of illegally amassing riches, while appearing to be on the side of the law, was ingenious. He ran a gang of thieves, kept the stolen goods, and waited for the crime and theft to be announced in the newspapers. Then, he would claim that his thief-taking agents, or rather bounty hunters, had found the stolen items, and he would return them to the rightful owners for a reward, to cover the expenses of running his agents, as he explained, as he pocketed the cash. In some cases, if the stolen items or circumstances allowed for blackmail, he did not wait for the theft to be announced. As to so-called recovering these goods, he would offer the authorities help in finding the thieves, who often were rivals or members of his own gang, who had refused to cooperate with him. Wild's business model and his ability to hold his group together relied on the public's fear. The penalties for stealing stolen goods became more perilous for criminals between 1700 and 1720. Wild avoided this danger and exploited it simultaneously by having his gang steal by whatever means, and then by so-called recovering the items concerned. He sold them back to the rightful owners, claiming all the time that he found the goods by good policing, and avowed his hatred of thievery. The penalty for selling stolen goods allowed Wild to control his gang very effectively, as he could turn them in to the authorities at any time. Giving the stolen items to him for a cut of the profits, the culprits were effectively selling the stolen goods. If they did not comply, Wild would simply apprehend them and claim a reward. Cunningly, he would use his thugs to arrest rival gangs. He was not the first thief-taker who turned rogue, playing both sides of the coin. Hitchin had used his position in a similar way, and when reinstated, he found that Wild was now a rival, and one of Wild's first acts of gang warfare was to eliminate as many of the people under Hitchin's control as he could. He held a virtual monopoly in London and it was thought that he kept records of all the criminals under his control. When they had outlived their usefulness, he would simply send them to the gallows for the reward. The phrase double cross apparently came into use as, when a thief fell out of favour with Wild in some way, he would put a cross by the name in his notebook, and a second cross that condemned the man to be sold to the crown for hanging. He boasted that he had sent over 60 thieves to the gallows. Wild's office, by now in the Old Bailey, was a busy place. Victims of crime would come there and tell of their losses, and discover that Wild's agents had turned up the missing items, and would then offer to help find the criminals for a modest extra fee. By 1720, Wild's fame, together with public pressure, was such that the Privy Council consulted with him on any methods of controlling the crime wave. His recommendation was predictably that the monetary rewards for providing evidence against the criminals be increased, and after some discussion, the reward for an arrest and prosecution was increased from £40 to £140, a tidy pay rise for Wild. His exploits against crime made excellent newspaper copy, and readers clamoured for more. Wild himself would approach papers with accounts of his daring do, and they passed these on to a concerned public. In 1724, the papers carried accounts of his heroic efforts in apprehending 21 members of the Carrot Gang, which happened to have a £800 reward. To the public, it seemed like a relentless defence of order. In reality, it was all-out gang warfare, disguised as a national service. When Wild solicited for a finder's fee, he usually held all the power in the transaction. One of his tactics was using advertisements, and one appeared in the Daily Post in 1724 and read, 1st of October, a black shagreen pocketbook, edged with silver, with some notes of hand. The said book was lost in the Strand, near Fountain Tavern, about 7 or 8 o'clock at night. If any person will bring aforementioned book to Mr. Jonathon Wild in the Old Bailey, he shall have a guinea reward. It was, in fact, extortion. The notes of hand, which were loan agreements, meant names and signatures. Wild already knew who was the notebook's owner, and through the advertisement, he was telling him that he knows what its owner was doing at the time, since the Fountain Tavern was a molly house, a homosexual brothel. The real purpose is to threaten the owner with announcing his visit to a house of ill repute, either to the debtors or to the public, and it even names a price for silence. London political life was experiencing a crisis of public confidence. The South Sea bubble had spectacularly popped 4 years earlier, which we also covered in an earlier episode, and the public was growing restless about corruption. Authority figures were beginning to be viewed with scepticism. By April 1724, the most famous housebreaker of the era, Jack Sheppard, was apprehended by one of Wild's men for a burglary committed in Clare Market. Sheppard had worked with Wild in the past, though he had struck out on his own. Consequently, as with other arrests, Wild's interests in saving the public from Sheppard were part of a separate agenda. Sheppard's criminal antics and frequent prison escapes became a local legend, and his former co-conspirator infuriated Wild. His inability to control Sheppard, combined with a change of public sentiment regarding authority figures, led to Wild's eventual downfall. His control over his organisation was also slipping, and he became desperate. He used violence to perform a jailbreak for one of his associates, and this incident led directly to his door. Being searched for, he went into hiding for several weeks and returned to business when he thought the incident had blown over. On the 15th of February 1725, he was arrested for the jailbreak incident and remanded to Newgate Prison. where he continued to attempt to run his business with his notebook in hand, whilst he tried to account for the goods coming in and going out of his office. Strong evidence had been presented during a court appearance against him for the violent jailbreak, which included having stolen jewels in his possession during the previous August installation of Knights of the Garter. The public's mood had shifted. While they supported the average man, they resented people they perceived as authority figures. On top of that, rumours of Wild's double dealings were rife. His trial occurred at the same time as the Lord Chancellor, Lord Thomas Parker, the first Earl of Macclesfield, for taking £100,000 in bribes. With the changing tide, it appeared at last to Wild's gang that their leader would not escape from justice, and they began to come forward and slowly to turn in evidence against him to save their own skins, until all of his activities, including his grand scheme of running and then hanging thieves, became known. It included proof as to Wild's frequent bribery of public officials. The trial proceeded at the Old Bailey during mid-May 1725 and drew enormous crowds, a testament to his notoriety as London's criminal mastermind, who was once revered as a saviour. He was now reviled as a criminal, as well as being part of the crime epidemic, all the while purporting to be the law-abiding solution. Wild was charged, among other things, with stealing 50 yards of lace from a woman in Holborn in January, called Catherine Stratham. He had orchestrated the theft himself and taken a reward for its return. His downfall was partly due to a law which made it a capital offence to accept rewards for stolen goods without bringing the thief to justice. He tried to shift blame, but overwhelming evidence and public disdain sealed his fate. He was convicted and sentenced to death. Wild asked for a reprieve, but it was refused. Terrified, he could not eat and suffered from a mental breakdown and gout. The night before his execution, troubled by his impending doom, he attempted suicide by drinking a large dose of laudanum, but because he was so weakened by lack of food, he vomited violently and sank into a coma from which he would not recover. When taken to the gallows at Tyburn on the 24th of May, his hanging was a popular event, and tickets were sold in advance for the best vantage points. He drew an especially angry crowd, who pelted him with stones during his hanging. Since he was heavily drugged, Wild was the last to die after the 3 other convicts had been executed. By a strange coincidence, the hangman, Richard Arnett, had been a guest at Wild's wedding. In the dead of night, the body was buried in secret at the churchyard of St Pancras Old Church, next to Elizabeth Mann, his third wife, being one of his many previous lovers, as he had wished. His interment was only temporary. In the 18th century, autopsies and dissections were performed on the most notorious of criminals, and consequently his remains were exhumed and sold to the Royal College of Surgeons.